the LACE project that's launching a series of webinars on learning analytics interoperability. And first I will give a short introduction to LACE, since it's the first one. And I'll try to do that by launching, sharing a screen there. It's the first webinar on learning analytics, and the LACE project is actually on learning analytics. If you go to the website, you will learn a lot about LACE, that we are very open and very engaged in trying to create this community. What is more important, I think, is to note that we are trying to address 3 different sectors. We are addressing the schools, the working place, the universities, but also we have a tab here in the website on data and interoperability. And neither the schools, workplace, or universities get anything in order unless there is some data exchange and interoperability. And this webinar is about the last item, data and interoperability. So what is the aim of the webinar? Well, the first objective is to launch a conversation about learning analytics interoperability, and which will try to demystify this concept in a short while. The long-term goal is to form a special interest group on learning analytics interoperability. But the path towards that special interest group is a little bit narrow and way dark at the moment. So we will see if we find some light. The objective with the first webinar is to talk about, or to bring a kind of big picture of learning analytics interoperability. Why is interoperability so important? Where do we start? I thought that we could have this kind of structure during this coming 55 minutes. First, I will give a short introduction to interoperability. Then we could have some discussion and some presentation on what is meant by the big picture, and we could look at some models in order to support that kind of idea. And then we need to look at the domain of learning analytics and see if there is some way to map the domain, and maybe we end up by discussing the way forward. I would suggest that we give a very short presentation or around who is present here. We are not that many, so we can do that. Brian, could you start? Just a few words.
Hi, Brian Kelly. I'm based at CETUS, and I'm the community manager for the LACE project. So I've got a particular interest in helping develop the LACE community and sharing information on what we're doing and listening to what people are doing.
Christina?
Hi, I'm Christina Smart, and I work at CETUS as well. I do some comms there, and I was involved with editing the CETUS Analytics series, and so there are links with that, with the LACE review, and sort of getting that discussion going in the community.
Adam? Problems?
My apologies, microphone error. I'm Adam Cooper, also from CETUS. Been involved in interoperability standards since 2000, and involved with some learning analytics activity for the last maybe 3 or so years. I think there are some big questions about whether we can get the right kind of data exchanges happening seamlessly and easily for learning analytics really to become successful in practice, and to move it out of a high energy research activity. And I think this is why we need to have a discussion about where the important areas are, where we can achieve some benefits with interoperability, and as the phrase goes, find the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, Maren?
Yeah, hi, I'm Maren. I work at the Open University of the Netherlands, and I also work on the LACE project, and just very interested in interoperability and standards like that in general. So I thought I'd just join and see what's being discussed here and see what other people have to say about it.
Good idea. Marika?
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute. Hi, I'm Marika. I work at Open Knowledge. I also work on the Linked Up project, which is looking at open data use in education. I'm also the Open Education Working Group coordinator. I'm no expert on learning analytics, but I'm really keen to find out more and how it fits into the whole bigger picture of open data in education.
And the last one is Wei-Chin.
Hello, my name is Wei-Chin Chen. I'm a colleague of Tu. I'm a professor in computer science. In my early days, I worked in analytics of analyzing collaborative learning. And I was recruited by Tu to join the LACE project, and I'm currently working with Tu on learning analytics interoperability.
Good. So then I think we should plunge into the task to try to find out what is learning interoperability. So this concept is a little bit strange because it gives shivers to people because they think it's very technical and complicated. But most people will not hear about learning interoperability because they just want things to work. In LACE project, we want to use a less techie kind of approach when we try to understand what interoperability issues are concerned with learning analytics. For us, interoperability is about agreeing upon important things and the process towards the agreement. That is the consensus process. So it's not only technical, it's not only syntactical, you might say. It's also about semantics. What does thing means? Could we agree upon some definitions here? It's also about organizational matters. Who are operating? Who are actors? And who do they cooperate? And it is even about political issues and legal issues. Political, what are the aims of the whole thing? And what are the legal frameworks even? So what is shown here, I can try to make a click here, trying to show some stuff, and the colorful image there is taken from the European Interoperability Framework for European Public Services that was issued by the European Commission in 2010. It's related to public services, but it does say that it gives a kind of level that I just kind of informally described, that you have a technical level, you have a semantical level, you have an organizational level, and even a legislative. That was very difficult, but anyway, a legal alignment level. So what we should do in this, at least drawing up the big picture, is to have a discussion on more than techie stuff. We have to have a discussion on a broader base. So if we have a look at three issues here: organizational interoperability, semantic interoperability, and technical interoperability. I think that's three boxes are enough. I mean, more than three, it gets complicated. Then we see that what we usually mean by standards or think about standards. We have, for instance, information models. That's clearly something to do with technical interoperabilities. But also you find vocabulary standards, and that is more about semantic interoperability. But when you look at the portfolio of CEN or ISO or other standards organizations, you also find process models. For instance, quality standards, which is not often thought about as interoperability standards, but nevertheless they are trying to make people agree upon a process. And it's clearly something that could be discussed in this context. Then the most general part of this is what you could call best practice guidelines. That is guidelines. We agree to do things like this, and these things might be technical, organizational, or semantical, or they could be of any nature. It's a best practice guideline. And of course, for our kind of context, data sharing policies are important, and they actually could go all over the place, because data sharing is about policies of data sharing. It's about defining what data mean. It's about defining the elements that has to be shared. So this is a very short kind of view on interoperability. And I would ask people that's been, Brian, I want to challenge you. You have been working with interoperability quite a lot. What is this view, this broad view, in accordance with your ideas?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you, Torre, that I think at one stage, I know in early days of the web, which is when I first got involved, I think there was a feeling that it was all about just agreement on technical standards, and then the value of those standards and the interoperability would just mean inevitably that they'd roll out. But in reality, we know there are a lot more other issues. There are political issues, there are vested interests. There might also be issues that people are too optimistic about the value of particular standards, and sometimes a lighter weight solution will trump the big picture, the all-encompassing approach to interoperability. So I think I would agree it can be a very complex area.
Fine. Adam, you had some ideas with the pipe and stuff. Could you take the floor, and I'll try to bring the pipe into the picture?
Okay, if you could, Tora.
Just let me. Ups. It's coming up. Just start. There it is.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite pictures. To illustrate a point, there's a quote there at the top that the map is not the territory, and from Alfred Korzybski. And he was pointing out really that although we might work with representations of things, in other words maps, there is something real behind which is different and separate from representation. And the picture René Magritte's "This is not a pipe," which kind of illustrates that. And I think so. For me, when we're thinking about how we might describe and somehow parcel up a domain such as learning analytics, data sharing, interoperability, whatever, we always need to be a little bit in mind of this aphorism, the map is not the territory. And there may be convenient ways of dividing things up, but usually they're for a purpose. So if we can now skip to the next one, Tura. This is a diagram which I produced in our first briefing paper from LACE, which I call the big picture learning analytics interoperability. And really it's an attempt to try to lay some of the background from a particular perspective. In this case, it's effectively an overtly data perspective here. We're talking about uses of the data, and very much a kind of thinking of what would happen in the system, how data moves around, how that might be enabled. And the reason why I produced this kind of map of the territory from this perspective was really to point out that although we might be thinking as people interested in learning analytics about education and the data that's about educational and learning activities, in fact there may be other areas as well which would be within an operational context that might be worthy of attention. So I've got there models and methods and analytical results, so models and methods. A model would be that model which you discover, for example, by data mining. Maybe you do a tree algorithm and you can find that certain rules could be applied to classify things. That's some kind of model. And how would you get there? What's the method? Now that might actually be quite useful in moving from a desktop-based system where you're doing some exploratory analytics into a production system where you have cloud-based operational services doing data mining. So I think by looking at a model from this perspective, we can think about some of the places in the overall process where we might want to pay attention to. Now, actually, if we look at all these, we can also then unpick some of the layers that Tura has just suggested around, so the legal issues, for example. So one point here might be if you are sharing models that you've acquired by data mining, you're no longer sharing personal data. So you enter a slightly different regime of what you need to do to manage things legally. So if you just skip to the next slide, Tura, and I'll finish off on this one. Okay, so here's at the bottom a geological cross-section. This is kind of looking a little bit down some of these areas. And Tura mentioned earlier this idea about the technical or syntactic interoperability, and then a semantic layer, which is a word I think we use a little bit too much in this community. Basically, it's trying to capture something about what these things mean. Very often, this isn't really thought about well enough. People say they give a kind of a box a label and assume the label describes what's in the box. And we assume that the same label may mean the same thing, when in fact, so I work in the UK 2 years ago or so, I found 10 different uses of the word course. And this only becomes clear when you really try to think about what these things mean. But I think we can also try to tease out some of the different layers within concepts within this semantic layer and say, well, there are some kind of higher level things. By higher level, I mean more general, more abstract. And then there may be more domain-specific things. And I think that's also a useful way of trying to think about and map out some of the differences. So I might place something like the sensor API that has been developed in IMS, and also the Tin Can Experience API. That works at a fairly high level. It talks about actors, what they're doing, an object they're doing it to. These are fairly high-level concepts. They're fairly general. They're not really talking about anything which is learning specific. So we can, I think, tease apart some of the learning analytics interoperability questions along this dimension also, and say where is it going to be productive to take action? Where are some low-hanging fruit there? Are they in the very educational specific area? Do we need to define some vocabularies that are about educational activities? Can we get some benefits alternatively by looking at a higher level of semantics and not being concerned too much about it? So there's a tension there which requires some discussion to work out what the best way forward is. And I think that's really one of the key things that LACE seeks to do, is to try to have a discussion which can tease apart some of these things, look at a wider picture of process in learning analytics interoperability, look at different levels of conceptual description and say where do we need to take action to achieve some benefits. That's my kind of soapbox on that topic. I'll pass the baton back to you, Tura.
Thank you. We have some viewers that are posing questions, and we might want to answer some of those questions I have to say that the tool is a little bit clumsy, or I'm clumsy. So I just remember one question from Alan Irby asking about, or just stating that it's pretty much about interoperability, about sharing data, and how do we define what data to share. I think that is one question that we will come back to when we are looking at the bigger picture. But Adam, maybe you can kind of capture some of the other questions as well from the Q&A tool, and we see where we go. So what I would like to propose is that we maybe we should look a little bit to models, more models. The boards we have created here, they will be available, and you will have the URL to them, and you can kind of add to the boards. But there are clearly a lot of models out there. I've created a small website that's called insulardrafts.tumblr.com. You see the URL up there, and at this website there are lots and lots of models to ponder. So I'm just scrolling through some of them. So in order to I mean, looking at these models, we clearly see that some of these models are technical, some of them are semantic, and some of them are organizational. I don't know how far we are going to pursue this level thing, but clearly there are a lot of model discussing interoperability and feeding into a kind of interoperability discussion. What I want to, I mean, we could have a look at some of them if you want, but maybe we should introduce Shen and ask her to give some opinions upon how we kind of come up with our big picture here, because my experience is that very often you have models and you think this is all done. It's clearly got a lot of thinking into the model, and then this conversation stops. So what is kind of interesting when you try to form a new community and engage with new people is to start from a little bit from scratch, trying to build up a model or build up a picture. And how do we do that, Shen? Do you want to share the screen or?
I'm sharing the screen if it's okay, if you can see it now.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing mine, and you have the floor.
Right. Yeah. What I'm going to do is to talk you through this mapping exercise we have started in this small group. So the goal is to make sense of learning analytics and interoperability. So our starting question is the low-hanging fruits is, are there any low-hanging fruits in the context of LAI? And if so, how can we identify these low-hanging fruits? So the exercise we started is this mapping exercise is first to identify the main dimensions of learning analytics interoperability. We are planning to achieve this by first identifying the elements or issues that are relevant to this interoperability. So here, tool has been very nicely gone through the existing research and publications, and list up the possible elements that are relevant. And this, you can see, this includes data sources, analytical methods, pedagogical methods, and so on. And then what we are going to do is by different criteria or dimensions. For example, we talk about level of interoperability, the stakeholders, their objectives, their requirements, and types of data, who creates the data set, and what the data are intended for, and so on. So as we can see from this Pamphlet wall, some of the elements we have identified, and an initial set of dimensions or criteria has been suggested here. And this Pamphlet is open, so everybody can contribute. We plan to continue this exercise and maybe use future webinars to discuss the progress and configurations with those who are interested. Yeah, tools, this is what I have. Back to you.
If you stop sharing the document, I'll and I wish Fabrizio welcome. You had a very big applaud, or at least a big entrée. What is shown here is available for you all at the URL which I have posted in the chat window. So you can access this board live while we are talking here, and you have also permissions to kind of move things around and also to add new stuff. What might be an idea, and it's a little bit experimental and it's a little bit advanced, I admit that, is to have a talk about what are these elements, and also how we could sort that. And in doing that, we could take a snapshot of what's the starting position, we can do a sorting, and then we could try to start all over again. And through that process, we see what is lacking. It's very interesting if this could work on a collaborative basis. But anyway, we could also do this offline and try to gather some other time and see and compare models and see where we have gotten. But that is an idea. And I think before I perhaps give a go at it, we could have some discussion on what is presented so far. So the floor is open.
I'll quickly interject here too. There's a question from Nick from Greenwich on the Q&A. To what extent does the work on HEDIP address the issues about quotes? What do you mean by X? HEDIP is it's a UK program. It's the Higher Education Data and Information Improvement Program, which is really trying to look at how data moves around, particularly between universities and the various agencies involved there. I think what we have here does relate tangentially in the sense that various features of the headache work program are going to be touching on it. For example, the replacement for the subject classification scheme is part of the headache program, and that provides important reference data that you might use, say, to triangulate between learning resources if they're described according to it, the courses and the course areas and activities, but also through to employment. And I think, in fact, it was one of the reports that Andy Ewell wrote, which was the one I referred to earlier. I think it's called "What is a Course?", which was describing these different uses of the word course. And one of the clear intents of HEDIP is to say, you know, we might use these terms differently. We need to understand what the business processes are around which we're using these kinds of data, and to clarify that, and to know when we can and cannot share something as being equivalent.
Other comments? You have to have comments. This is an interactive workshop. Quiet.
One comment. We discussed right at the start about the wide range of different issues related to interoperability. It's not just an issue of the technical aspects. One question I would have, based upon that diagram that you showed previously, is where does the business case come in for it? So how much does doing learning analytics and learning analytics interoperability cost? How should it be funded? And what ROI would you gain from doing it? So there's the business model, and then there's the motivating factors. Why should people be interested in doing these things when people are already busy as is?
I think if we look at the kind of first elements or issues that were captured in the board that Chen introduced, I think business models or rationales for doing learning analytics is very much present in those issues. So my answer to that would be that we could give a kind of initial answer to what is the meaning of life, so to speak, but the real true answer to that will only be gotten at when we have done this sorting exercise and really experienced the multidimensional characteristic of this domain, because it's very complex. I could point to some of those while we discuss, but before doing that, have you got on your own computer access to the board directly? Could you just answer?
I do, and I see the "Feel free to add more stuff" button in front of me.
That's particularly designed for you, Brian. But I mean, what I think is I mean, your question was very nice, because if we go to this here, let's try to make some order. Locus of intervention. When we are discussing learning analytics, it's very much a question: what is the locus of intervention here? What do we want to achieve by using the data? For instance, do we subscribe to a kind of cognitive learning theory? Or then maybe, I mean, everything could take a particular path. Or do we subscribe to a learning activity more centric approach? Are we discussing social kind of networks and social aspects of learning? Are we concerned about student agency? or are we just concerned about the agency of the shareholders of the university if that is a private enterprise? So I think, I mean, locus of intervention is certainly one box here that we could relate to that question. What more? You have here the learning analytics aims. Let's just try to make some space. That's pretty much the same thing. I mean, it kind of zooms back a little bit and saying, okay, is this exercise about trying to make the education more streamlined or aligned with the industry requirements, or is it about graduate preparedness or other kind of definitions or aspects of this box might be? So let's see. Others that see things. Educational presence is pretty much some of the same thing. I mean, it's very much related to this locus of intervention. What more? You have something that's called comparison points. That is, I mean, when you are doing learning and analytics, it's a question where do you want to use it? Do you want to use it for kind of capturing theoretical patterns in your education or in the courses your university gives, or do you want to relate that to peer activities? I mean, that's related again to this social aspects of locus of intervention, or do you want to address, for instance, prior activities? I mean, that could be in a more training-like scenario where you have more individual learning styles, and so on. You see my point. You could kind of move around all these boxes and discuss them, and at the end of the day, you might say, okay, this is a kind of cluster of ideas or activities that we need to make some sense of and maybe build some consensus about. And in doing so, you might want to start with a kind of non-technical part of an interoperability standard, a kind of best practice or a vocabulary standard. That was a little bit of thinking, and I had to draw my breath and give you the floor. Anyone want to have a go at moving things virtually?
I've had a go at slightly moving things. I just wanted to just from a sort of an outsider perspective, and bringing in a slightly different sort of the sort of technologist perspective or the hacker perspective to it. I was just wondering how building on top of the data came into this map, because I was thinking about, I don't know if you know about the P2PU have just released some of their data from their MOOCs, and we've had some discussions around that, and it's kind of what could you do with this data, how can you build something on top of it, what tools could you create, and these are the kind of communities that I work with quite a lot. So I just wondered where that would fit into this board. Would it come under solved by others, or is it a different box? Or I was just wondering.
Adam, solved by others is your pet in a way. I mean, I'm thinking of your predictive models and stuff. Could you just?
Well, Interestingly, it's I think one of the really serious challenges we have in mixing data from various sources or looking at data from other sources is really to understand what it means, what it really means. So, as an example, we might get a dump from a database which is about forum activity, and they might have nice tables there talking about, you know, groups, forums, threads, posts, comments, who comments on what, and it all looks very nice. We might even have, you know, a description which indicates, you know, what a thread is and what a post is and what a comment is, that appears to be conceptually very clear, but actually what the activity means is often critically dependent upon the user interface. For example, if I'm looking at read data, you know, what was present on the screen? Was I required to navigate to a single post to read it, or could I scan a whole load? Is the presentation of the user interface such that I would realistically, you know, click reply to an existing reply rather than the thing I was actually replying to? Would I make a comment on a different post than the one I attached the comment to? So, to answer a lot of these questions, you need to look at the actual user interface that was there, presented to people. You know, was it the Coursera version, or was it edX? How did the actual presentation of the user interface affect the significance of these ideas, such as forum, thread, post, comment, to people who are using it? And that, I think, is one of the challenges we have in going too deep and to assume that we can understand too much, you know, that we can do a social network analysis on some forum data and really take it very far, because it's so often contingent upon, you know, the presentation. The presentation is what makes the parts real for the user, and that does make it quite tricky. So we need to be a little bit humble, I guess, in what we can share, unless we're dealing with data that comes from fairly structured and regulated sources where we know it's been through some process. So, for example, you know, if there's anything to do with formal high-stakes assessment and grading, certainly for, you know, let's say, a national curriculum-related grading, you know there's a lot of similarity there. You can trust that things are pretty much going to mean the same depending on whatever the source they came from. If it's about VLE data, we need to be a lot more cautious about how we can say, yes, this means something the same here as it did there.
Mm. Marika, did you you got some questions, some answers there, and do you have any comment?
Yeah, I can see it's complicated. Yeah.
But there is a lot of what should we say, a lot of expectations on that there are so much data around. I mean, the tweet that's connected to this. I'll see if I, yeah. Some minutes ago, it was a tweet that said, "Why is data suddenly so important? It's exponential increase in supply, matching ability to analyze, awareness of data." And this is a very kind of bright and shiny story, but on the other hand, there is an abundance of data, but does it mean anything? And could we kind of have a common understanding of the data? That's really a challenge. So, I mean, there is a cluster of stuff here that's concerning data. I mean, data that we have, and it's clearly increasing. Data we want, data that we want but we will not have soon. A lot of them, and then you have the whole domain of MOOCs. Where, I mean, I just got this from a presentation today somewhere, and clearly some of the high hopes for MOOCs are the ability to do some data mining with the MOOCs data. And in Norway, in a few days, there is going to be presented a white paper official white paper on MOOCs, and learning analytics is one of the recommendations that will be there. So there's clearly a kind of need to sit down and have a proper conversation about how we see data, what do we understand with data, what is realistic to exchange, and what is there already. Yeah. So then we have kind of in our picture we have a very high, on the left side we have the kind of high-level discussions on pedagogy, on the philosophy behind learning analytics, what is driving that. On the right hand we have what are the data that's going to make us achieve our high hopes on the left side. I draw my breath.
So I think this point about why is data all of a sudden so important is an interesting one, and we do need to be wary of the potential disconnect between what we have on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. If we focus our attention saying, we've got data in all these systems in our universities and colleges and schools and other organisations, if only we could bring it together, we would discover such amazing things. And that may be a little bit of an optimistic perspective, but I think also if it's not being driven by questions from the left-hand side in the diagram here, Ture, we risk spending lots of time and effort, whether it be interoperability or building systems or just talking about it, to gather data really without having thought what we wanted to do with it and why we were doing this. So what's driving this? Is it a fear that we're missing out on an opportunity to use data that we have, or are we really ready to say, here's a problem and I realise that I can solve it with data we already have or that we could collect? That I think is another important point. Should we be assuming that there is data that we should be trying to collect, and that's definitely got to be driven from why you would do it rather than just collecting a manner of new pieces of data.
So are you having those conversations with these consumers of the data, or the people who are going to use it, create things from it?
Well, that's actually one of the intentions of LACE. I mean, it's quite a difficult thing to do in practice. So LACE really is intending to try to bring together at least three important aspects. So one is, we have an existing research community there. We also have people working within institutions, either in the teaching learning aspect or in the information systems part. And we also have the commercial sector there supplying infrastructural or learning technology related products there. And so LACE's purpose really is to try to increase the dialogue between those groups of people, such that the new practices, whether it be technology or pedagogic practices which are developed, are meaningful in all three camps and are not somehow isolated. So that's what we intend to do, and we've got the events, various workshops to try to get people talking together. It would be nice to have some online interactive activity, or we're trying to have a webinar series to try to get people interested in thinking across the boundaries. So, for example, we have a workshop at the CETIS conference in June, which is about thinking about what a strategy for learning analytics would look like for a higher education institution, to try to kind of to say what are the points. And this, I think, links back to Brian's earlier question about, there's the business case in all this. And if we're thinking about a strategy at an institution level, that's got to answer questions about, what value is being created by the use of learning analytics, who benefits from it, how we're going to engage them in shaping what it is, the service we provide to them, what technology provides them, how do we communicate with them so they can understand the potential benefits, who's going to pay for it, what's it going to cost, what different approaches might be taken in terms of big infrastructural projects versus more guerrilla-based activity in terms of building analytical capability. So that's kind of the point of that, is to try to triangulate between these concerns and not to be too overwhelmed by, I suppose, a fear that we might have either as governments or education institutions or individuals that all this data is there, and if we don't get stuck into it, we're missing out on something.
We have 10 minutes left, and we should look a little bit forward how to bring this forward. I mean, in standards work, when we are talking about interoperability and discussing interoperability, there is a key concept that's called scope. What is the scope of the discussion? Because if you don't have a scope, you just keep adding stuff, and it's a mess, and quite a few of the standards are like that as well, because they lack a good scope. And what we have discussed today is that there are scope for a great number of discussions that could be held, and these are discussions that typically are held outside the research community. I mean, if you look upon all the papers that's been published, I mean, there is a recent journal on learning analytics. There was a conference recently on learning analytics, producing a lot of papers. So there are lots of stuff and discussions there, but there are academic discussions trying to make the academic shine and go forward, not necessarily creating a consensus. I mean, of course there is a consensus process going on in research as well, but this is a different consensus process. So what is the few projects that's viable for launching discussions about within interoperability or learning analytics? That's the big task, and where the big picture needs to be considered in order to answer. So how do we kind of pave the foundation for that kind of endeavor? I could answer myself saying, okay, keep on mapping, but are there other answers?
Okay, so one, I'll take this answer as being an invitation to say something. One is the this Open Learning Analytics Network. Been a couple of announcements recently, one from Solar, and there's a short article on the LACE website about that, with a vision really to work at several levels around an open source software, but also interoperability. Look at some of the legal and policy issues around what it would take to have a commons, I suppose, of technology and ideas that would allow people to build, fit for their own circumstance, the kind of learning analytics platform that they wanted. And using platform there not just to mean the technology, but the governance aspects around the data and legal and policy perspective, etc. And that is one where the ability to have this sort of a modular approach, one which is able to be use components that are then assembled and contextualized for a particular point of view, really requires an element of knowing where the boundaries are, having some element of interoperability there, at least of some kind, to try to reduce the overhead of making these things work in practice.
One of the
Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking is the involvement of the stakeholders. they are the ones that generate the data, and they are the ones that benefit from the analytic process results. So somehow this mapping exercise is internally for us, for expert in learning analytics to work on this mapping, but eventually the stakeholders, I think they should be involved for looking at the mapping or sorting results and give us feedback on from their perspective.
Yes, and that is why we should try to engage more and more stakeholders, or also people outside the kind of research or expert circles. One way of doing that is to do it in the kind of research like pattern, try to go out and ask questions, and we will certainly do that. The other one is trying to bring people by invitation, trying to drive them to meetings like this, and we will certainly want to do that as well. I think we would like to conclude a little bit, and that is rather difficult because we are kind of making up the road as we walk, but nevertheless we will show you where we want to document what we are doing. So here you see some resources. I mean, if you closely watch this space, the laceproject.eu, and look under the menu Data and Interoperability, you will find stuff there. We will try to populate with ideas, and we will certainly announce the other webinars. If you want to have some time off browsing through models, you can go to this URL insulardraft@tumblr.com. If you want to work more on these boards, you have the address there. And I think we just have to say that the next webinar, it's coming up pretty soon. It's not exactly scheduled date yet, but it will be announced on laceproject.eu. And I think we are now more or less finished, and just if anybody wants a final comment, this is the time. Big silence. Okay, then we keep you posted on the splendid website laceproject.eu. Thank you for turning up, and see you later.
Thank you very much, Tura.